You're about to hear a conversation with two financial experts on how architects and engineers can take control of their firm's finances. But here's the best part. We've taken all their best tips and turned them into a mega finance checklist that you can download and print for free. Here's a sneak peek. You can grab your copy right now using the link here and follow along. Now let's get into it.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited. We're doing something a little bit different this webinar. Generally speaking, these have been pretty focused on recent releases, and we will be doing more of those soon. But for today, we wanted to talk a little bit more, and we're bringing some great experts from outside of Monograph to help give you advice on making your practice better financially. So if you could go to the next slide, we can deal with some intros first. As I mentioned, this one is going to be a lot about financial clarity. I'm Ashish. I'm the Chief Product Officer here. What that means is I'm in charge of the prioritization of the types of problems we try to solve for you all. Really fortunate to be here. I've been here about a year and a half now. I am going to let Eileen introduce herself, who's our VP of Customer Experience.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eileen. I'm one of the Monograph OGs. By this time, most of you have probably met me at some capacity. I've been in Monograph for 4.5 years. I manage the customer experience team, so I get a pleasure of meeting a lot of you, working through your onboarding, support questions, subscriptions, all of that. And I also get the pleasure of putting together great panels and great webinars for you.
And before we dive in, I did want to just do a little bit of self-promotion here. We did just recently launch a report that gives you a bunch of insights around salaries and other financial metrics. I think it's very relevant, obviously, for today's webinar. If you haven't seen that, you can go to our website. But basically, this gives you a lot of the benchmarks that you can then measure yourself. Those of you that are Monograph customers, you can compare yourself, or those that aren't, hopefully this gives you kind of a lot of clarity. And this is all based on real, actual data, anonymized, of course. But I think one of the few, or maybe the only opportunity for you to get that level of data that isn't kind of self-surveyed or something like that. This is based on real financial data that we have in our system. So really recommend, if you haven't had a chance, to go download that. And now we can get back to our regular scheduled programming, and I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. So first, we have Hannah. We're really excited to have her giving you guys advice. I'm going to let her introduce herself and let you know how you can get in touch with her if you so need.
Yeah, so I'm Hannah Brown. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I primarily help small firms with either financial management or HR issues, and have been working with Monograph, I would say, for probably 3 years.
Yeah, I remember when I first joined, you were, we got to meet, I think in my first week, and I had a whole list of things that we needed to improve from there, and hopefully got to most of those. So thank you, Hannah. You've been awesome to help us, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. Hannah, if I can ask, when is it that design firms usually reach out to connect with you? What is the problem or something that they're trying to solve?
Well, I always describe it as that I'm on the operations side of things, and that the operations is kind of like a three-legged stool where you have marketing and business development, you have financial, and then you have the HR. And I always say that people call me when one of those gotten cut off and they need to rebuild. So I no longer help in the marketing, but I used to do that. That's actually where I started. But the HR, it's like when somebody's quit, or there's a performance issue, or they need a handbook because it's getting bigger. Those are the kind of HR issues that I get called in for. And on the financial side, it's usually more like, oh my God, it's tax season and we're doing our planning, or we need to figure out what our bill rates are for next year. And those kind of bigger picture planning on the financial side. Or I'm doing invoicing and it's taking me 4 hours and I want to hand it off to a firm like yours.
That's great. Thank you for answering that. And as a fellow Floridian, I get the pleasure of introducing Shauna. She is a CPA. She has her own practice, Prospera Strategy. Shauna, I'd love to hear from you. Similar to Hannah, how do people usually get in touch with you? When is that moment that they decide, oh, I need Shauna? And a little bit too about your business.
Yeah. So to answer your question, most of the time people reach out to us when they're just bogged down in their books and they're tired of doing it themselves. That can be when they've just reached a revenue level and they're at the beginning and they're just like, I know I don't want to do this anymore. What do you guys charge? Can I afford that? Or, hey, I'm like behind on my taxes because my books are such a mess. Then, like there's always that some problem that's come along in the mess of the financials. Typically we're sitting there like, yes, get out of the books, get out of that stuff that is not generating revenue for you, because we can do it in less time, better, higher quality, give you the answers you need to run a better business. So yeah, we provide bookkeeping, accounting, and tax services for small businesses. I grew up working in small business, so I love watching small businesses thrive. I've been a business owner for years now.
That's awesome. Thank you. And do you typically, I was thinking about like your portfolio of accounts, how did you get into working with architects or I guess designers in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. My father is a civil engineer. Both my parents worked in the firm. I started working in the firm when I was 11 or 12, working in QuickBooks. So I've been working in the financial management side of an engineering firm for a very long time. And so there's just so much about project accounting and that type of tracking that is second nature to me, that I realized even in my accounting program. So it's like, these people don't even know. My fellow students were like having to grasp what an invoice was. And I was like, well, I can talk to you about progress billing, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's just kind of part of who I am at this point.
That's awesome.
Now it all makes sense why you were able to, Shauna was absolutely critical in helping us understand QBO so that we could build the integration that we did. And I'm very proud of what we've built, and I don't think we could have done it without you. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. For today's format, as we mentioned at the very beginning, it's a little different. Usually we have a lot of slides that we walk through, but this one is meant to be really an open conversation on practice, on finances. And so Ashish is going to be leading our conversation today. He's going to touch on challenges with questions for Shauna, for Hannah. And then as that is happening, I will be looking in the Q&A for questions, right? I'm going to group those questions into general themes, so that way we can use the second half of our session to address those questions to Hannah, to Shauna, and maybe even some of Ashish if you have some questions about our product. So with that said, it is panel time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we're not just like these little tiny boxes on your monitor and you get something a little bit more exciting to look at.
Perfect. Thanks. So yeah, I think we'll start with maybe some general practice areas, and then we'll work our way into kind of more specific things. So, not to kind of preach too much, but Monograph kind of, our mission was to simplify, to improve this process and make it kind of understandable for those of us that don't spend, that didn't start at age 11 building out invoices. And, our hope was that providing that financial kind of education would help everyone run better. So to that end, I'd love to hear, maybe I'll start with Hannah. What are some of the biggest financial challenges that you see with the small and mid-sized architecture firms and what they face today?
I would see a little difference between the small and the medium, because I think when you get to the medium, you start to have a little bit more of the systems in place, or maybe more consultants who are helping you. But when you're small, I think some of the challenges are like the principal's trying to do everything and maybe has a bookkeeper or has a accountant, but they're still in the weeds a lot. And so it seems like financially, I'm constantly hearing those questions of like, when is it time for me to hire another person or bring something in-house? When is it better to have a consultant? Those kind of things. And then on the financial side, I think that right now, currently, the biggest thing that I'm hearing is just a lot of uncertainty. So I think there's a lot of concerns currently and uncertainty about where we're headed in terms of, yesterday, I think the tariffs were pulled. 2 days ago, we were worried about what our wood might cost and how that might affect construction. And And then so there's just like this sort of yo-yo going on that I am seeing like certain firms are losing projects or losing funding, and then other firms are like booming and so busy. I wish we could distribute it
Right.
a little better, but that's the harder
Great.
part. Yeah. But I think cash flow has been also the big worry in the smaller firms, and it starts to become like a bigger headache, but less of a worry in some ways when you're in the mid-size, but you have to bring in more, but there's usually more in the bank. And so I always try to help firms kind of understand what does it take to keep the doors open. If I hire one more person, what does that do to my monthly nut? Right? And then what does that mean in terms of my billing? Like, how much could I bill this person at if they're a junior designer or project manager? And since I'm doing the HR as well, we're also trying to coordinate with, who is that person? What are the skills that we need to bring in to build up a team?
So on that first point around when to bring someone in or hire or maybe use a consultant, do you have a rule of thumb, or how do you kind of navigate that conversation or help people figure out what they should do there?
Yeah. Well, I always I have a really simple method of like put a little sticky note on your laptop or your monitor, and every time you're doing something that you don't want to be doing anymore, write it down. And then let's evaluate it in 3 weeks or 2 weeks and see what you've written down and whether or not that can be like lumped together into some expert that you might hire as a consultant, or whether it shifts to other people on your team because of strengths. So I work a lot in kind of coaching the principals around those kind of concerns. And it's pretty simple, because it's usually like, what do you not want to be doing? Or what should you, or if you flip it around, it's like, you should be X% billable. And we usually targeting like 50% with small firms. And the other 50%, how do we make it the most efficient so you're in the best parts of business development and not in the bookkeeping?
Yes, that makes sense. And we at Monograph try to eventually get to a place where hopefully Monograph can take care of some of that stuff for you as well. Shauna, any additional or different challenges that you've seen?
I think one of the biggest things that piggybacks off of what Hannah was saying about like when to hire someone, and I'm talking more on the like adding a designer to the team. Like, you've got enough projects and you're trying to figure out, when do I make that first hire that starts to take stuff off my plate? One of the things that I see in some firms happen is you make those hires. So maybe there's one of two ways. They either hire too late and they're overwhelmed, right? And working a million hours a week and barely able to even do the interviews to bring someone on. But there's plenty of revenue and cash flow coming in the future for that person. Or they're like, I know I'm going to need it based on the pipeline, so I hire a little early. Both of those can be bad because, if you don't have time to train accurately or train someone well, then you end up in a world of hurt and that person's not quite as effective as you want them to be. But if you bring them on too soon and now all of a sudden you're not reaching your targets for billing, now you end up in a cash flow pinch. And so you can kind of like see both of those with small firms where people just don't have enough time to get their head out of doing the work and managing the business. And I think that's a hard transition for all of us in all business ownership, not just architecture firms. There's not enough hours in the day to run the business and do the work that's required of us as professionals.
So that, I think, is a great segue into, so to try to kind of get a handle on all this, and I'll stick with Shauna, maybe what are some key processes or things that you recommend that people are doing on a regular basis to kind of ensure that they are staying on top of all of this?
Yeah, I think the first one is just having really good company financials. If we can't look at your gross profit margin, I can't look and tell you if you're maybe not marking your subs up enough for the pain that they're causing you in the work. Or if I can't see your net margin, then I can't tell you if maybe you have too much staff or you have too much in expenses, or you're not hitting your billing timelines or whatever that looks like. There's just nothing to analyze if we don't have that data in front of us. So I think a good monthly cadence of having good numbers, and 1 month doesn't make a trend, right? So you've got to do the trend analysis. You've got to know where your seasonality based on your clients falls and know how to expect that and plan for that as cash. So I think the full company financials are one piece, and you guys have done a lot to service that, which is awesome. And then there's the project profitability. You've got to be able to tell what clients suck and that you shouldn't work with anymore, honestly, or where your team maybe isn't experienced enough. So you budget a certain amount of time and they're taking way more and the project's upside down. Like you have to be able to know that, to know how to price future contracts.
Love that. Hannah, any additional things on your end?
No, I mean, I think that's a great place to start. I mean, as a consultant, I'm usually asking people, hey, can you send me the P&L from last year and then send me the P&L for where we are to date in comparison to last year, and ask your bookkeeper to get that. And then I'm starting, usually trying to dig in, like, okay, how much are the expenses? Are there things that are redundant or we could cut out or that don't make sense anymore? I've had many people like on subscription services for things like marketing that they're never touching. And it's like, whoa, why are we spending $10,000 a year on this that you have put like 30 minutes of effort into this year? That one's not working. So it's just kind of like getting those kind of figures. And then I love having something like Monograph, or if it's not Monograph, like I can look at the project side of things and say, okay, yes, which projects are doing well, which teams are doing well, which individuals are doing well. And then if I'm doing the actual invoicing, I usually try to set up very rigorous processes where it's like, we're looking at it on the first of the month to make sure everybody's got everything in. We're running some reports. We're creating draft invoices and then talking about if there's any write-off needed. And then we're quickly getting those out so hopefully the turnaround is quick to get paid. And then we're doing it again at the 15th of the month. We're looking at like, where are we halfway through the month in terms of what we think we should be doing for this month. So as somebody like working full-time on this project that we did not want them to, we wanted them to be 20 hours a week, and we needed them to pull back. So once we get that sort of like cleanup that I would mention, like we do then try to flip and then say, let's be proactive and get right in there so that we every 2 weeks we can reassess and move people around if they aren't doing the right things.
You stole my next question, which was going to be, as Shauna mentioned, you're looking at it month by month, and everything is, 1 month doesn't make a trend. But I think the other thing that we've seen or we've observed with our customers is, obviously projects can be years long, phases can be long. And so, and I think you kind of started touching on it, but how do you ensure that you can get that visibility, on a regular basis when things can last a very long time? Are there certain things like invoicing on a regular cadence or other things that you recommend? And that could be for either of you.
I think for me, it is that monthly report and then that half monthly check-in, because I do want to be able to pivot if things are going the wrong way. And then it's like usually at either an end of a phase or some milestone like 50% CDs, and some of the phases can be really wrong. We're clicking in and making sure we're just handed in 50% CDs. Did we spend 50% of the fee, or spend more or less? And so that kind of individualizes to each project, since some go very quick and some stretch out. That could be a 6-month phase, that CD. So that's the other way we're also looking at it. Usually when I meet with project managers and we're reviewing the previous month's billings, we are double checking that we are on track with where we are billing, especially on the percentage basis.
Great. And then lastly, on just this kind of more general set of things, are there, I mean, obviously, Monograph might be an answer to this question, but are there like particular tools, technology, things like that that help, that you generally recommend people use to help? Maybe I'll start with Shauna.
Yeah, I mean, I think implementing project tracking is the biggest thing. If I were going to start someone that's like, okay, I don't know where I'm going, it's like start with just tracking invoicing and having that good process, and then make sure your team is tracking the hours to the project. It's that's not always something that has to be done if you're working on a contract basis, right? Or you're not doing billable hours, so you can just do the work and crank it out. But that's not helpful when we start looking at internal costs and knowing if you're pricing high enough, the timeline's too long, like what other things need to be built into a flat rate contract, where there need to be change orders, that type of thing. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is like start making sure you have really solid processes for the invoicing within that project tracking, and then do the time tracking to it.
And anything to add?
No, I mean, I think it is so important to me when I work with any client and they tell me that they've been doing their timesheets and their invoices in Excel. I'm like, whoa, we got to move on. That is just like, we're going to be spending way too much time, and there's way too much room for error in trying to synthesize things. So that's when I'm usually like, okay, we need a monograph. We need something that we can do the project tracking and make sure that we really can monitor the amount of time and the amount of output that's going towards these projects and the phases. Yeah.
Yes. Internally, we often joke that our number one competitor is Excel, a spreadsheet, because that's generally, where what a lot of people do, and it makes sense when you're starting out. But I think, that makes sense.
The reality is, like, no one wants to pay for tech, right? Like, we all have subscriptions every which direction. Like, we know it, we get it, but there is a very high price to pay for bad information, which it happens when you manually enter it in Excel. As an accountant, I know that, right? I see a lot of financial. That's not correct.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. So yeah, actually, let's go to the next topic, which is focusing in a little bit more on cash flow. I think, I would be surprised if anyone argues that cash flow isn't kind of the biggest challenge, especially for smaller businesses, as Hannah referenced earlier. And I think, we're always trying to find different ways at Monograph to help, optimize that for our firms. But, taking a step back, I'd love to hear, maybe start with Hannah. What are the reasons that you think that people struggle with that so much, and maybe some of your recommendations to kind of mitigate those?
Yeah. Well, I think as architects, we have a really hard time asking for money and pushing for it. And then some people, architects are excellent at it, and they don't have this problem with cash flow usually. But I think what I have loved about Monograph is that it kind of depersonalizes that asking for money a little bit. Saying if you're sending the invoice out through Monograph, they can pay through Stripe. There's not, they could send in a check, but it's like, and then you can also set it up that Monograph is setting auto reminders if they haven't paid on time. So if you have a net 30 or a net 15, they're getting a reminder on the reasonable amount of time that you set. And I usually set it 2 days after the deadline, so they're getting, again, so it seems like I'm out there monitoring it all there and sending them reminders, but I know they know it's automated, that they're getting these from the system. And some of them are what I've found is it kind of trains the client. They want to beat the system and they don't want to get the reminder email. So, and some are, some need it, some need the push. And so I think that's been usually a lot of clients, sometimes when I'm called in, you kind of prefaced it with like, when do we get called? But one of the reasons is because there's like somebody who hasn't paid in 6 months and the architect's still doing work. I'm like, wait a minute, we all have to say we're stopping work or you're not getting this set that we're about to submit to the building permit department until we get paid. And you have to hold firm with that, because that is the value of your work. Is if they don't see the relationship value, they will see the document value and the fact that they might not be able to get permits if they don't, pay up. So unfortunately we have to do that once in a while, but it's so important, that. And that's one of the reasons I love having the project managers involved, because I can really quickly say, wait a minute, you cannot give out that set yet this week. We need to send that email. I'll send it, asking them to catch up. And then I'll let you know when it's done and we can send that set out.
And
That brings up. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I had a follow-up question for Hannah, because I think that's, and this is weird, but my background is in landscape architecture. And so I worked in practice, and like late payments was a thing as a project manager. Like it was always this battle of like, can we do the work? Have they paid? Have they not? And I'm just curious, and this actually can be a question for either one of you. Have you seen any wording, anything to include in your like invoicing, right? That kind of like helps to get past that hump. Like, for example, I know that net 30 is very common, but then when you give net 30, sometimes they stretch it out to like net 45, right? So I've seen some companies implement like, kind of a little penalty where you pay late, but curious if you've seen something where maybe it should be net 15, right? That's what you tell the customer, but really like you're kind of expecting it around day 30. Any tips or tricks like that?
Yeah, I personally love the holding to the net 15 or 30, whatever is set out in the contract or agreement, and then doing the reminder emails. And that's part of my agenda, like each month, is to clean that up and watch it and not let it get too far along, so it does not get to 90 days. And then the other piece of it is, we usually it's saying that it's actually part of the agreements that we will charge interest. And most of the architects I work with have that line in there that they will charge interest, but they don't use it. But I am seeing it be very, very helpful with a few firms, because we actually do have some clients that don't pay. They pay twice a year. It's just part of their like MO, I guess. But they are totally okay with paying the interest, because they don't want to pay a monthly invoice. I don't know why. I mean, it's like cash flow for them is also an issue, I think. And so this is how they deal with it. And they're like, okay, charge us the late fee. We understand that you're a small firm and we have to do this. But so I've been trying to implement either those late fees or the interest.
And I think a big part of it too with invoicing and setting terms is like, it's really about understanding your client too. Like if you work with a lot of, if your client has grants and they have certain stipulations that they're having to meet, or they are using some type of funding where they're having to go and like they're answering to other authorities, it's not just cash. Like they're not just holding cash, but there's actually this whole process. You've got to have that built out for your firm too, if you want to start or continue working with clients of that type. And that might look like having some sort of line of credit that you pull from pay down. And I see a lot of firms like don't utilize that or try to form those relationships with local banks in order to have that type of funding, because you can get into this. It's really a timing issue between when your clients pay versus when your subs are expecting payment and when your employees need payment. And so you're profitable. You might be highly profitable, but the timeline of how everything flows in your business creates a lot of pain. So you've got to understand your business, your timeline, your clients. Decide if you want to work with those clients, or maybe have a little bit of diversification in there of clients that can pay faster. There's a lot of knowledge behind your specific business that has to go into cash flow planning.
Yeah. Can I share just the rule of thumb that was passed on to me long ago when I was in-house? And that was that we shouldn't have any business client who has more than 30% of our business. And that is helpful if that is the type of client that doesn't pay. The other 60% are supporting us. I was also, if that client goes away, it's going to be a real hit on the business, but it's not going to crumple the business most likely. So I've always used that kind of rule of thumb to watch, how, and I think we can use it with project types as well. So when you do have a nonprofit that's getting like public funding, we don't have 100% of our business that way. We try to keep it to that 30% so that and it can be part of the cash flow strategy.
Sometimes that's the downside of like having a niche. Like there's a lot of risk in niching too.
Yeah, that's really insightful and makes a lot of sense. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket if you can help it. I did want to follow up on something, Hannah, that you mentioned, because we sometimes have a lot of questions around permissions and like access for project managers on financial information. And so it sounded like, if I understood you correctly, Lewin, you think it's important for project managers to be a part of kind of this billing and the invoicing, or at least have visibility into that. Could you talk more a little bit about that and why you think that's important?
I think it's so important for the future of our business, is training people early that time is money. And especially if we're an hourly billing firm, and even if we aren't, we have to be efficient. And I know that people learn and respond in different ways. And I've had the good fortune to, at one time when I was in a firm, have a designer whose computer wasn't working. And she actually made like little tick marks on her computer for every half hour that she was down. And then she brought that sticky note to us after a month. And she was like, look at this. I was down for what would be like $3,500 of my billable time. Can I have a new computer? And we're like, yeah, no brainer.
I hope she got a Cadillac computer for her really nice one.
Yeah. And I was like, that's the way we need folks thinking, is like time is money, and like these little things that I need to improve my efficiency on, like I've got to track it a little bit, and I'm gonna be held to those. So I really like, I know there are people who are allergic to opening up, but at least giving people a guide of, this should take you 40 hours. If you're at 35 and you're not there yet, and you feel like you need a lot more, you've got to come and check in with me because something's going awry. So we need at least like some, and I think when we add the money component, it's just one little extra factor of like when it's so hard when we go to a project manager and just say that was over budget. And we don't give them like, how much was it over budget? Who was over budget? Like, why was it over budget? And to do more analysis on it.
And I know accounting software like QuickBooks Online, I can't set someone up to just access the project function. And it drives me insane because I'd love to just be able to select the projects that they can see so they can go in and look at it, pull reports, play with the data, because they need to be able to do that.
Well, hopefully they can just use the project profitability report in Monograph now.
Exactly.
And they don't even need to go into QVM. Awesome. Cool. So I'm going to, actually, it's a good segue to kind of shift a little bit towards Monograph specific questions. So given, everything that we've just talked about, for those of your clients where they do have Monograph, like how have you found the kind of impact to their decision making and like ideally, hopefully improvements on that front? Maybe I'll start with Hannah.
The improvements have been like better communication about where the clients are in terms of the project. And then it's also been easier to communicate back with the team in terms of where we are. So, with most of my clients, we're seeing that project tracking tool of like, here's your schematic design phase and here's the line of it. And then here you guys are. And that looks to be about 70%. And is that where we really are? Because that's how much we've spent. And at least we can have a cognizant like discussion of we're going to need to ask for more fee, or it's going to take a little bit longer, but we're going to save. We're going to have a shorter DD phase for some reason. So we try to go back and forth, and the project managers and I are usually trying to, like, the project managers are in charge of the staffing side of the monograph. So assigning people for how long they should be on things, because I don't know how long it's going to take them to do their work. I have no idea. So they're doing that, and then we're double checking that makes sense in terms of the overall budget.
Other things that come to mind, Shauna?
I think for me on the financial side, being able to see where the team has put in hours and being able to see the bar of like, okay, we're over cost here. I think, again, as business owners, sometimes we feel like we're just trying to get everything done. And so we have no visibility down into that data, but it's so easy in Monograph to just like scroll through and be like, okay, like that project is a stinker. Like it didn't go well. We've got to fix it before we price another one like that. That visibility has been huge.
Awesome. And Hannah, you touched on this a little bit earlier. I hadn't actually thought of monograph invoicing as a way to like hide behind somebody so you don't have to ask for money yourself. But I like that positioning. We might use that. But specifically, obviously, because we're talking all about financials and cash flow and things like that, we do still have, some firms that maybe don't use monograph for invoicing or to collect payments and things like that. And I'd be curious on kind of your take on what the kind of challenges might be with not doing that.
Being like having a person?
Or just not utilizing some of those tools in monograph.
I think, well, one of them is that you are more reliant on a person and their schedule. So I love that auto feature that is reminding people when they haven't paid, because I forget to do it. Or I get busy and I'm doing too many of them. And so it gets backed up by a couple of days, and that's a few more days that we won't get the check because the person did totally miss the first initial email. And I think some of the other, we really like, it's also made the meeting that I have with the principals and the project managers, that used to be kind of like an hour and a half long process, sometimes more, a lot of back and forth, a lot of questions. We now have that kind of down to like, it usually takes the small firms with 20 projects, 45 minutes of meeting and going back and forth. And then I might have one or two questions, but my questions are getting like reduced because I'm getting so familiar with all of the projects and all of the needs. And also I know who to ask because I've got it all in monograph and I can see, oh, so-and-so worked on this. And so if I need to write off time that's specific to maybe a rendering, I can call or email that person and ask them how much specifically was for renderings. And then they're usually calling up monograph and saying, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I started to put all my time in like 8-hour buckets for that project. I should start breaking it out. But here's, I'll go back and figure out how much of that rendering took so we can hold that time.
Anything to add there, Shauna?
Yeah, a few things, because I get to see the glory of these manual processes a lot. And designers love designing, and they love designing their invoices. And so this is actually one of those things I've run into in, like, for people using QuickBooks and trying to send invoices or anywhere. They're like, well, I like the look of what I have. I'm like, yes, but let's talk about the cost of that. Because now if it's in a spreadsheet that you're tracking this stuff, because you have your beautiful invoice. I'm sure I'm speaking to someone out there about these thoughts.
I'm very familiar.
That now in your financials, I have no insight into what's actually sitting out there to be able to forecast cash flow. We have no ability to really send those reminders of knowing like how far out of date they are. Or if you're like, oh, well, I go back and I enter them in QuickBooks. Okay, in that one busy month where you just forgot to enter those, now we have no insight into that. You forget that invoice was ever sent. There's just so much that gets lost. And then what does that wind up in? It winds up in poor cash flow because we're not following up with clients. We can't see projects that where maybe that client isn't ever going to pay and you shouldn't do any more work for them. Don't bring on that second project. There's just so much that we can't see because we're tracking in an Excel sheet just to make something look beautiful. And so that's just on the invoicing side. Then let's talk about payments. Every step along the way that you add for a client to pay you is like, I'm sure there's got to be some stat about how much extra time you add to getting that payment. Whereas if they can click a link, pay the invoice, move on with their life, it's very, very different. If you're like, well, I send an invoice and they have to send a check, or they have to log into their bank and they have to send me this ACH, and there's just too much there. And so you probably add at least days to the timeline of receiving your money.
You teed me up. I think the stat that we have on Monograph is it takes 6 weeks if you do it manually, and 3 weeks electronically, and down to 1 week if you accept credit cards. So that's my last pitch there.
Well, and think about it, that those
down.
weeks, like there's payroll in those weeks.
Yes.
If you're like twice, so if you pay every 2 weeks, that's a whole payroll cycle. And our manpower is our biggest cost, right?
Exactly. Great. And we're going to do some Q&A, but before we do that, I want to give you guys both a chance. If you just had to give everyone advice on one thing they should do in 2025 to help the financial health of their firms, what would it be? I'll start with Shauna.
Just start looking at things. Like, I know that it sounds bad, but I think it's easy to just like put our heads in the sand. Like, I'm a business owner too. And sometimes you're busy and it's like, I don't have time to look at that. I'll do it next month. I'll do it next month. Or we do that on our personal side. But you can't make changes. You can't steer the ship if you just don't make the time. So even just once a quarter, make a date with yourself, put it on the calendar, block the time. No client, no employee can interrupt you. Look at it, figure out what it means for your firm.
Anna?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think Shauna said a lot of it. And I would only add, I think, that to add an aspirational goal in there for yourself in terms of whether it is as a principal, how much time am I billable? How much time are my people billable? How efficient can we be? And then what does that mean in terms of, like, last year we were billing X amount per month, and that meant, 15% profit. Let's push it to 20% this year. And how do we get that?
Love it. Thank you guys both. And Eileen, I don't know, I haven't been monitoring the
Nope.
Q&A.
I got you. I have a whole list. There were definitely topics that got the Q&A popping. So I've been grouping them. I've been flagging all the ones we'll be able to answer live. So I think one that got a lot of folks' interest, and this will be part for Hannah and part for Ashish, is about interest, right? And so the first one is for Hannah. And the question is, how do you establish a rate for the interest? Like, how do you establish that interest percentage?
Well, usually it's in our contracts. If it's not already, I start adding it at 6%. And then that usually some clients will knock it back, but I don't see it lower than 3%. Because it's not worth it to do like 1% or 2%. And if you're going to do like 1 or 2%, do it as a flat fee. Like every month that you're late, we're charging you $30 or something like that. And so that we've been trying to establish in the contracts, and then I move it forward. Unfortunately, it's harder to do on those clients that you already have established. And so it's usually something you got to pick up with all the new clients.
That makes sense. I think that's great advice for definitely when you're starting a new client, and just making those adjustments to the contract. And then the question for you is, if I want to implement charging my client an interest rate, what's the best way of doing that with monograph invoices today?
Yeah. Well, when Hannah gave that advice, I was like, man, we need that feature. So we don't transparently with the feature. Right now we're focused on trying to get you paid on time. But what I am excited about, and I think I referenced it earlier, we'll be sharing some more updates. We're pretty focused in this area. There's a reason that we have this webinar. And so there will be a lot more improvements around invoicing, including batching them, doing them faster, more automation. So I think it's a great idea. The short answer is, for now, you would have to effectively recreate the invoice if you wanted to charge a penalty, or you could do that as like an additional invoice that's just kind of the penalty or the interest. But I like the idea, and we'll be putting it on our list for improvements for sure.
Yeah. And another one too, I mean, if they just paid you, but they paid you late, and perhaps you have like the flat fee of like Hannah described, you can include that as a line item in your next invoice.
Yes.
So it doesn't mean you have to like recreate the whole invoice. I would just say, hey, reminder, like this amount is outstanding. And the great thing is, if you end up using a digital payment option, when they get that invoice, they're not going to be able to edit what amount they pay you, right? They control, they're able to pay that amount. So thank you both for handling. There was a lot of interest. There were several questions around interest. So interest on interest. The next one that generated a lot of buzz, what about writing off invoices? And so I think this is a question both for Shauna and Hannah. So what I'm seeing is, again, a lot of questions about writing off invoices, but I think we all know that if you're writing off an invoice, it means that you are losing money, right? Because this is time that you work, you are choosing not to invoice. And so I'm curious if you have, any advice on how do you prevent, an invoice ultimately becoming, like a write-off? Is there anything, whether it's in the contract or in like the coaching with your team, just to minimize how many invoices ultimately get written off?
I'm sure there's also a stat out there about how the longer somebody takes to pay, the more less likely they are to pay. So I don't know what that stat is, but that's one thing I am always watching, is who's that individual or client that is taking really long time to pay. And if they've skipped an invoice. So when someone skips over an invoice and pays the most recent one, I immediately alert them, but I'm also alerting the project management team, because I'm curious, is there something about that invoice that they're in their mind questioning and haven't brought up to us yet, or have brought up to the project manager, and I need more information. So I would say there's a lot of communication around that in terms of making sure that the clients are happy with the work that's done. And I would rather write off a small amount of an invoice than a whole invoice. So I want to get in there and have the project manager or the principal involved early on to say, look, they skipped over the last schematic design invoice. Any idea why? Was there something that happened there? And was it just forgetfulness? And I'll be reaching out to remind them, but I want the principal to be aware, or the project manager to be aware too.
And I saw a question that was kind of like on the technical side of it, of like, how do I write it off, or like, what does that look like? I'm not a fan of deleting invoices out of the system, because you get a whole timing effect, you get the lack of record, all of that sort of thing. And so the ability to write it off in the period in which you realize it's not collectible, so it's written off to bad debt, it's removed from sales, that type of thing is important. Because I think someone said that and it's messing with their profitability. And it's like, yeah, you have all that work that was done in one period, and now you're having to write it off in another. And so it makes it look weird. And if you don't want to cross year end with that type of thing either.
Yeah.
That's actually going to be my next question for you, because I know I threw you one about something we don't support. I threw you one about something good coming.
Yeah. So we are working on two aspects of writing off. So writing off time, so that I think actually, Hannah, our first lunch, you talked to me about how Monograph needs to support this. And 18 months later, we're getting there, but basically being able to write off time so that you can keep track of when you're not going to invoice a certain amount of time, but then also separately writing off invoices. So as Shauna mentioned, in Monograph right now, you can't actually say like, this isn't going to be paid. It just kind of stays there forever, which is understandably not ideal. But our current recommendation would be in QBO to still mark it that way, but we'll be supporting both of those in the near future. And obviously we want to try to avoid both of those situations, as Hannah mentioned, but we are adding some of those features in the near future.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashish, for clarifying that. So just before we move on to the next batch of questions, there is still more interest on the questions about interest that just came in late. And I'll open this up to Shauna, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but just to hear from you as experts. So I got some questions about, are there laws or anything that you are aware about where there is a maximum that can be charged in late fees to clients? Like maybe perhaps some advice on to like where that firm should go to know what that number is.
And I might have to loop Hannah in on this, but I think it might be state specific. I know like for credit card charges, that's state specific. So you might just have to look at where you are and what that looks like to make sure it's not some abnormally high interest rate. But I also think having it in the contract is a big piece, right? Like you can't just slap it on your client after they just don't pay. It has to be part of that contract agreement with them.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly why I wouldn't put it on old clients who haven't heard about it yet. Maybe late fees, but not interest. I've usually conferred with our accountants and based it on the state that we're doing business in. I can't remember what the exact numbers are, but I know in the past we've usually started at 6% here in California. And I also know there's less limitations on those of us in private business than there are in credit card and the banking world. So we have if you look at something for a particular industry, make sure that you double check it with your accountant because it might not apply to private business and to professional services. And also ask your lawyer because they do it.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to say. I think it's probably just the general good advice here is once a year, look at your contracts, make sure that, the lawyer, there's a lot of small law firms that will do this for, a very economical price, very accessible, and take advantage of just, cross-checking. There's always the AIA contracts, if there's any changes locally, and go ahead and add, the language around, the interest rates and all that. My next question is actually for Shauna, because I've been seeing a couple comments about this. So I think folks are definitely interested in those clients that suck, or I think you call them also the stinker clients, which is true. Everyone always might have, a client that isn't the best, but it can be really, nerve-wracking if you're a smaller firm. Getting rid of that bad client. And I think, Hannah, you gave a great metric of hey, you probably don't want to have more than 30% tied to any client for that reason. But I'm wondering if you have, any tips or some advice for customers that do have those stinker clients and they need to find a way to graduate them out of their business. Any advice there?
Oh, I could probably do a whole webinar on that.
I feel like that's a whole other webinar with cocktail, after hours.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is a reminder to the business owner, because we can end up in this, and I say we again, I'm a business owner, we can end up in this phase of, or feelings of fear where it's but they pay, right? And so it's oh, but that's cash. And it's sometimes that is worth it. That sometimes is a very small part of the time. Hopefully, if you've implemented all this other financial stuff we've been talking about and you're working on your cash flow and you're reviewing things, sometimes you get in cash pinch and you need to just take that on, suck it up and get through it. But that is not the majority of your business. And you need to understand that if you have clients that are constantly breaking your boundaries, so Maybe you have a project manager that's supposed to be the point of contact, but yet they're always talking to you, the principal. Think about how many hours that actually costs you over the lifespan of your business, how many sales you don't have, how many other clients you couldn't go out and get because of that one client. So it's not just like, oh, but they were cash. It's like there is an opportunity cost to allowing those clients to be in your business. And revenue is not always the right answer. Like sometimes it's better to say no to money and yes to peace and go find better clients because they're out there. You just need to go fish in a different pond because wherever that one came from, you might need to look for some trend analysis if that's where all the stinkers are coming from.
Yeah. I can already see you writing like a relationship book. Like this feels like it crosses over into dating advice. Sorry, I used to do it.
I was just going to add that one of the things we do in the beginning of the project is find out where people have heard about us, and when it's coming from someone who we had a bad experience with, that we really take a second and really look for other reasons that they might be a good fit. So I'm always trying to ask that in the beginning of the process. And I'm also like, if you just got to end it with someone, if you keep it to design, like this, your vision of design is not aligned with my vision of design, and therefore we cannot service the project we want the way we want to, and try to let it go at that. We're not getting into personalities or other things that are usually the underlying cause, but a lot of times it is design related, where somebody's like, I got to have my purple tiles in my kitchen, and it doesn't align with the vision that the architect has at all. And it's like, all right, this isn't going to end up in our portfolio. So what if they're not paying us like the top dollar, this may not be worth it.
My favorite thing is to just make it about the client in the best way possible. Like you deserve the type of service that you need to make this come to life. I don't know that like we can do that well for you. And so I want you to be able to get that, right? It's like, it's me, it's not you. It's okay to do that. And that goes back to the relationship book, right? Like if you're going to let someone go, how do you do it? And make sure your referral network and everything is not like blown up. It's me. I'm sorry. I just couldn't fulfill it.
So, well, on that note, I know we are right on time. I'm going to share my screen one last time to leave everyone with this image. So I think we had a great conversation today. Thank you so much, Shauna and Hannah, for giving us those insights, Ashish for moderating. For everyone here in the audience, feel free to keep the conversation going. We have the report. It's on our website. It is free. It's going to give you a ton of insights. It's there for you. And then, of course, feel free to connect with Hannah and with Shauna. You can find them on LinkedIn. You can take a quick screenshot of this if you want to reach out to them personally. If something that they said today really resonated with you, I'm sure they would love to hear that as well. And, on behalf of Monogram, I'm also speaking here on behalf of the Shishes, where at the end, thank you both so much for being part of this conversation. I think it was great. And I think especially that we're having it at the beginning of the year, hopefully it helps for any projects that other folks might be getting. You can, add those interest rates if you don't have them on your contracts. And then before you know it, we will have a ton of different features also to help you in this process. So.
Yeah, I definitely learned a lot. Thank you all. And for those of you, if we didn't get to your questions, we'll try to look through those and either send you a follow up or try to get that answered one way or another.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.